I'm astounded that I could have felt financially deprived growing up in a family that had so much, but I did. I envied the kids who lived in bigger houses that had swimming pools and little pool houses with refrigerators filled with fancy food. Some of my friends had famous fathers, and I equated talent and success with wealth. On a psychological level, how we feel about what we have is heavily influenced by what those around us have. Comparison. I was sometimes ashamed that my father was a salesman, even though he co-owned a small manufacturing company. Almost all of my closest friends had fathers who were doctors, lawyers, professors, songwriters, or movie stars. In my white, Jewish, upper middle class bubble, poor kids were the ones who lived in apartments. West Los Angeles was the geographic source of my reverence for money and my belief that people who had it were superior. Another source was my father's reverence for money. Money was his primary source, perhaps his sole source of security. He'd grown up without much, and I think must have become anxious about money when his own father died when he was young. He had wanted to become a lawyer, but after graduating from UCLA during the Depression, he had to get a job to feed himself and help out his family. His life was organized around making, counting, and investing money. He had lovers and friends and played tennis and made jokes, but the constant and consistent love in his life was money. Another source of my learned reverence for money was that my mother came from money. My grandparents and great-grandparents on my mother's side had died long before I was born, and I never knew them as real people. But it was a source of pride to me that my mother's German Jewish family had made a fortune in California during the gold rush. Their social status in their world and in my eyes didn't come from doing good works in the world or contributing to the society. It came simply because they were rich. I was impressed by the photographs of their fine homes, their fancy clothing, their trips to the pyramids in Egypt and to Europe around the turn of the century, when the only way to get there was on luxury ships. My aunt, my mother's sister, was the one who transmitted the superiority of our lineage, and I ate it up in an attempt to bolster my fragile sense of self. Money looks like it can compensate for things lacking or lost. My father used it to compensate for the loss of his father. I imagined money would give me a sense of self-worth. What I didn't see then was that my deprivation wasn't about not having enough money and the things it could buy, but was from how alone and disconnected I felt. My envy of those richer was a sign of something out of balance, but it was pointing in the wrong direction. Externally, I had a privileged childhood, good public schools, a nice house, stay-at-home mother, vacation, bills always paid in full. But there was little to guide, support, or ground me. No community or synagogue to feel a sense of belonging. No siblings close in age or extended family. No kids to play with in my immediate neighborhood. No cultural or spiritual heritage. No passion to make things, no vivid imagination. I watched a lot of television alone. I learned a reverence for money also from my beloved half-sister, Judy, who was 16 years older than me. than I, and became a heroin addict in the early 60s. My mother used much of her inheritance to bail my sister out of dangerous situations and provide psychiatric treatment in an attempt to cure her addiction. My parents had brutal budgeting arguments about how much money to give to Judy, and my father always had the upper hand. He controlled the money, even though the savings and the investments mostly came from my mother, from my mother's inheritance. He never hit my mother physically, but he hit her emotionally over and over and over. They had completely different priorities. My father's concern was for his own survival, which was the same as his financial survival. And my mother's concern was for her daughter's survival, which made her willing to spend everything it took. My mother had to beg my father for money, and at some point he stopped the flow, and my mother sold her jewelry and her blood to get money to keep the drug dealers away from hurting my sister and to help pay for the psychiatrists and the shock treatments. My mother had great faith in the power of money to help. She had faith that money could save my sister, and I shared this belief. What I didn't see until I began to wake up about my relationship with money, that even though money hadn't saved my sister, I still held on to the belief on an unconscious level in money as a savior. Money can seem like the source or solution for all problems. It's really good for paying the rent, purchasing and fixing a car, putting food on the table, those kinds of things. But the solutions to money problems, to most problems, can't be reduced to money. They are of a different order. Money doesn't bring meaning. Money doesn't save souls. It doesn't stop pain. Money doesn't take away dysfunction in families. Money doesn't protect you from difficulties. It doesn't fill you up when you feel empty inside. It doesn't make you happy. It doesn't make you loved or loving. It doesn't make you feel connected to something beyond yourself. I've untangled my stories so many times now, rewoven them with new insights. I've added threads of compassion and forgiveness. I've gained new perspectives. I've come to see my privilege, my race, my cultural and DNA inheritance. I've worked it, and I have more work to do. The major shift came when I loosened the stranglehold of the commodification of my life, the monetization of my own life, measuring out with dollars and cents, holding me back out of fear of not having enough, not being enough, thinking money would save my life. May I live from this point on from what I truly value. So once again, I throw these fragments of my money stories up into the air, and I let them glide on the wind and the currents and dissipate, to let the turkey vultures transform and purify them. Thank you.